We've been talking about qualitative research, and in our previous videos, we talked about focus groups, we talked about interviews. In this particular video, we're going to look at projective tests. Projective tests can be used with interviews or with focus groups, and it is a technique for tapping into respondents' feelings by having them project those feelings into unstructured situations. So a technique for tapping into respondents' feelings by having them project those feelings into an unstructured situation. Okay, so sometimes when we are doing interviews, we want to ask people about very sensitive things, personal experiences, trauma. We want to ask them about how they feel. We ask that in an interview because they're less likely to share that information in front of others. But even if it's in front of a single researcher, people may be reluctant to share those feelings. And they may also have trouble verbalizing those feelings. So projective tests create a bit of a safety net for explaining how you feel or explaining a traumatic event by having you explain it not about yourself and your history, but projecting it onto something else. Onto another person, onto a cartoon or image, so that it is really not about you. It creates a bit of a safety for us in terms of being able to tap deeper in to our feelings. So a technique for tapping into respondents' feelings by having them project those feelings onto an unstructured situation. And by having it be an unstructured situation, that allows the participant to go in the direction they want to go and to read into that image or whatever they're projecting on to the depth and the amount that they are safe doing. So let's look at some examples of projective tests. Okay, there are word association, sentence and story completion, cartoons, photo sorts, drawings, storytelling, and other third-person techniques. So we are going to use it when people are reluctant to express their true feelings, or as we said, unable to, right? It may be that it's hard to verbalize exactly how something made you feel. And so we could do this with that unstructured, imaginary situation to help get to what we are trying to get information on. So let's look at each type of these projective tests. Okay. The first type of test is word association. So this is a projective test. I really got to find a better way to write and so that it's not so bad. Projective test. I'm writing on a vertical screen, and that's why and I have terrible handwriting to start with. That's why it's garbage. Projective test in which interviewer says a word and respondent mentions the first thing that comes to their mind. Okay. The key here as the researcher, projective test in which interviewer says a word and respondent mentions the first thing that comes to their mind. So the key here as the researcher is to take words you care about and mix them in with neutral words. So it's really not clear what you're fishing for. And what we're doing is not only looking at what word that the person gives, but the response latency. How long does it take them to come up with a word? If the time to respond is more than 3 seconds, then there can be an emotional connection to the word. So people are searching for an acceptable response, right? We are very protective of how we're perceived by others, about how others think about us, whether or not what we say is acceptable, is okay. We don't want to be ostracized. We don't want to be outside of what is kind of the norm. You don't want to be thought of as too different, too extreme. And so I often think about is this the appropriate response? So if something takes more than 3 seconds, then likely it means there's an emotional attachment to the word. Now, if the response is really long, it could mean that they have no attachment to the word at all. So no response to a word, then there's no immediate association. They don't know what that word is. It has no relevance to their life. So we're looking at how long it takes to respond. And then if it takes even too long to respond, then that tells you it's not relevant. We can use this in social research and psychology. We can also use this in marketing to look at what associations people have to a brand, an advertisement, slogans, themes. We can look at it in terms of how people feel about more sensitive issues, as we talk about their experiences. Maybe we're looking in terms of more of counseling, psychological help, mental health, looking at triggers and experiences. So an example, let's suppose that you want to find out, people's thoughts and feelings about banking. We'll go with something kind of generic. So to do the word association test, we would say, okay, well, what's the first word that pops into your head when you hear postal worker? Okay, bank teller, networking, transit, automated teller machine, Persian rug, driver, banking by phone. So we mix in ones that we don't care about with ones that are more relevant to the topic that we're looking at. How long did they take to respond to those different words? And we would compare how long they took to respond for the more neutral words that we don't care about versus the ones that are more specific to the area of research. And so this word association actually comes from the work of Carl Jung in psychology. So you want to pick the words that you want to find out about, as well as pick ones that are more neutral, where people don't have an emotional attachment to them, where they're more just day-to-day common things. The next type of projective test is sentence and story completion. So in this case, as it says, respondents complete a sentence or story in their own words. And probably the most popular, the most useful in terms of all the projective tests, it's basically giving us more depth, right? That word association, if they just give us a word and we're looking at how quickly they respond, there isn't as much depth to that in terms of interpretation. Why did they think of this word? What is the connotation of it? What's the context? You don't get to that richer experience. And the more traditional interview, right, wants to get to that more rich, that more depth experience. So here, by having them complete a story in their own words, you're allowing them to provide more information, more detail. So we have the respondent complete a sentence or a story in their own words. And then we might ask, in terms of why did they take that approach? Why did they focus on that? So for example, we could say we are doing research for a beer company. A man who drinks light beer is, and then the respondent would tell us. And so this gets at the perception of light beer. We had talked previously in a previous video about one of the challenges, right, with selling light beer is it wasn't seen as very manly. So the sentence completion would get to that. What are people's perceptions of light beer? And so then the advertising campaigns could focus on, well, how do we beat that stigma that it is, it's a diet drink, it's more feminine, it's not what manly men drink. And so we can get past that, because if you gave people the drink just based on taste, they like the taste, but they don't want to be seen drinking it. We could ask, for example, imported beer is most liked by. So here we're getting to stereotypes, stigmas. Who do people see as using a particular product? A woman will drink beer when. Okay, so is beer a woman's drink? How is that perceived? So trying to get to how do people see particular products, or what are people's views and perspectives, right? So we could ask in more the like political interviews and some of the social science, we could say, okay, well, a person who votes Democrat is, and then have it be completed. So what are the perceptions of who is a Democrat, who is a Republican, to get at what are the perceptions of different groups or different companies or different products. We could, here you have a story. Since Mr. Albert Lee had received a large commission by check just before leaving home for a holiday trip, he wanted to deposit it in an automated teller machine. So he deposited his money in an ATM because, so why did he use the ATM versus going to a bank teller? But his friend, Mr. Wong, told him that he should do what? Because, and so you're having them fill in the story. And in this case, we're finding out more about using an ATM machine versus using a bank teller. So you could have it where they're considering different scenarios. Why would they do this? Why would this person do that? To get to motivations. And so rather than ask, and these are pretty safe and generic here, rather than asking someone, well, why would you go see a bank teller versus using the machine? Here we're projecting those opinions, why the individual who's responding might be doing those things onto a story. So this one is very generic, but you can see why we would use this in cases that are a lot more risky, right? So we could talk about how, an individual has contracted a sexually transmitted disease because they did what should they do about it? And so it's a chance to kind of separate that from the individual themselves, to project it on to these characters in the story, rather than an individual having to talk about their own experiences, right? The next one here is a cartoon test. So this is a projective test in which the respondent fills in the dialogue boxes. Of the cartoon characters. So the benefit of the cartoon test is that pictures are fun and easy to understand. They can be adapted to any type of research topic. The pictures are fictional, so there is that who cares mentality. So again, it's an ability to separate yourself and a response that you might think, oh, well, that's an inappropriate comment to make, or that's not going to be deemed favorably by my peers. When you're putting it onto a cartoon, it's like, well, it can be fun, it can be joking. There's less risk here in the response, right? The challenge to it is that analysis can be difficult. So how do we interpret the response that they gave? What does that actually mean? Can be a bit harder to how do we actually use that going forward? So we would say, okay, well, here's an image. Which one do you think, drinks more milk? The person on the left, the person on the right. We're kind of getting to what are the perceptions of a milk drinker. We could say here on the right, this is a picture of someone looking at, hey, that's a nice car. Where are you going in that nice car? And then the respondent could fill in that bubble to explain, okay, well, people who drive this type of car, here's the type of lifestyle they have. So again, we're more brainstorming here, getting perceptions, getting ideas, getting to how people perceive different individuals, different products, different events and activities. Who are the people who do different things? The next type here is what is called thematic apperception tests, or a picture interpretation technique. So in this case, the researcher shows the participant a picture and asks them to describe what is happening in the picture. So we show you a picture here of two individuals that are at a cafe. We ask what is happening in the picture, what emotions are being conveyed, what happened right before this picture was taken, what happened right after the picture was taken. So then people will kind of project their own experiences or their own opinions onto the picture. So if they, are quite upset, maybe they've just they've been broken up with, oh, well, they're all smiling now. The second that picture's taken, they're all fighting. So getting at some underlying opinions that individuals have that they may not want to talk about or share on their own. So you can start with the picture, have them explain what's happening, what emotions are there, and what happened before and after. We could show an image of a brand, a logo. We could see like this one here on the bottom left with a tree, and say what type of definition would have this logo? What type of a company would have this logo? If this is for a destination, what type of activities happen in this destination? So we can actually test out here. So for example, if your town is looking for rebranding, you can then go and ask people, okay, well, if this is the brand, if this is the logo, if this is the image for our organization or for our location, what does that tell you about the company? What does that tell you about this locale? Okay. So thematic apperception tests are one of the more popular ones in terms of these projection tests. And then as we were talking about before, right, photo voice is instead of the researcher providing the picture, you have the participant provide the picture. We can also give you lots of pictures. So photo sort is where the respondent sorts photos of different people. And then identify people they feel best represents a product, an activity, a feeling. So for example, we could show you all these different pictures and say, okay, well, who would use from this group, who would use an iPhone? Okay, so getting at, well, this a particular product, an iPhone, is seen as maybe younger, hipper. So the participant might pick people who are younger age range. Maybe we would ask, okay, well, who is more likely to use like an Android phone? Well, that's going to be someone who, kind of wants to rebel against kind of mainstream. The iPhone is too much what everyone else does. And so we would look for pictures of people who look like they're more rebellious, don't do what everyone else does. So we can use photo sorts to get perceptions of products and who would use products. You could also use photo sorts to get at, you have pictures of different activities or different individuals. Okay, well, who is feeling anxious? And so the respondent might not be willing to tell you in the research about why they're anxious. Maybe they really have trouble kind of pinpointing what creates anxiety for them. But by projecting it onto the photos, well, this person is anxious because, they have a high stress job. And this person is anxious because they have young kids at home. And so trying to get to more in terms of what triggers anxiety in the respondent when the respondent may not be able to identify for themselves. But by projecting it onto images, then it creates a bit safer environment. We can do research on compatibility, on dating. What are people looking for in terms of a date? Who do they match up with on an online app? And so they might feel like, okay, well, telling you how I really feel and who I really choose to date on an app might seem not socially acceptable. So then you can do photo sorts. Okay, this group is more the group I would date, this group is not, and then you can start to explore more about what those photos have in common. What does it mean to be more attractive, less attractive? And so photo sorts can be used to kind of help group together and then have them explain kind of why this group, why this photo, to help kind of probe a bit deeper. So we could ask things like, who would use a 24-hour fitness facility? And so perhaps the company, thinks, well, 24-hour fitness has this perception as being, for jocks. And so is that true? Is that how people feel? Have they just picked the athletes in the photos for a particular product? Some other types of projective tests. We have consumer drawings. So this is where the respondent is going to draw what they are feeling or how they perceive something. So, for example, we could have you draw a picture of the typical Tim Hortons customer, okay? And look at, okay, what is the perception of the company? Well, the perception of the company is that people go to Tim Hortons on their way to hockey practice. And so we expect, are we getting pictures of Tim Hortons customers that are a bunch of kids at an event? So how are people perceiving a particular company or brand? We can also use it to have people draw like how they are feeling. So draw a picture of your happiest moment. And so then that allows the researcher to probe and say, okay, well, why was this your happiest moment? What about it made you happy? And getting them to give you more of the details to outline that feeling there. And it can be used when people have trouble kind of explaining and using words to kind of explain how they feel. McCann Erickson was an ad company. They wanted to find out why Raid, the bug spray, why the spray was outselling the combat discs. So I don't know if you've seen them. They're little round things. The idea is that the ants would crawl inside and die versus spraying the bug that they find. And so they asked people to, draw a picture of a customer who uses these products. And what they found is that people mostly drew kind of heavier women. When they asked, who are these people? Low-income women in southern U.S. That's who's dealing with the bugs. Now, I grew up in the southern U.S. There are a lot of bugs. So I definitely get the farther you go south, the more bugs there are. So those are the type of customer who is going to have to deal with this. And then they asked people to draw pictures of prey. What is it that you would kill with your bug spray? And they had people draw pictures of it. And when they had these women draw pictures of bug spray, they mostly drew pictures of men. So they were asking them, okay, well, why, why is it that you're using bug spray to kill men? And what they found is that the reason that people like to spray as opposed to the little house that the bugs go into is they wanted that control. They wanted that sense of revenge. They wanted to participate in the kill, get all that anger out. And so because of that, they can help in terms of target the advertisement, but also kind of understand consumer behavior. And the people actually, at least this group here, like the act of actually terminating the bugs. Whereas if you look at research related to larger rodents, trying to deal with mice and rats, people don't want to participate in the kill. And so for those types of dealing with that particular types of infestations, then they're actually, then it's more of a no-kill black box. Go in, die, stay there. Don't have to look at it. Don't have to think about it. Don't have to participate in the kill. So it's important to understand kind of that underlying piece. But if you ask people why they liked the spray over the little hotels, they really couldn't explain it. So we can get at underlying issues here. All right, storytelling. Storytelling is a projective technique in which respondents, tell a story about their experience. And that can be an experience with a company, with a product. So tell us about the first toy that you got as a child. What was that toy? How did you end up getting it? So walking us through that experience, telling us a story about some experience that they have had. And you can combine these different techniques. So we could do storytelling with photos. So go online, find us some pictures that represent the experience you had last time you were at Tim Hortons, and then show the pictures and tell the story to kind of help illustrate how you felt, how the experience was through that process. And then the last one that we're going to look at here is the third person technique. The third person technique is a projective test in which the interviewer learns about the respondent's feelings by asking them to answer on behalf of a third party. So about your neighbor or what most people do. So this allows for richer insight than some of the other projection tests. It is storytelling, but there is that safety in terms of it's not about you and your experience, but it's about somebody else and what somebody else does and what somebody else feels. And so you can avoid that social desirability bias. We talked about that previously, right? Which is you think about, well, is this appropriate for me to say or feel? What will other people think when I make this comment, or if I tell others I have this view, this opinion? And so this third person technique is where we could have them tell us about your friend's experience, or how do you think most people behave in that. An example of a third person technique was Folgers. They had commercials that I should have put the commercial up on the screen. Let me pause for a second. All right, there we go. So here's an ad for Folgers. So in the 1950s, Folgers coffee had a number of ads like the one you see here. And you can see in this video, it is showing that the wife is bringing her husband a cup of coffee. So at the time that Folgers is offering their instant coffee, there's a perception that a good wife is one who takes the time to brew a cup of coffee for her husband. So a third person technique, here's some research on how we perceive instant coffee. So 2 groups of about 50 housewives were randomly selected. They were each given a shopping list. And the difference between the shopping lists is that one had instant coffee and others had ground coffee. And they were asked to describe the housewife. So based on this shopping list, what does it tell you about the person? Well, in the 1950s, what they found is that the list that had the instant coffee, those women were identified as being lazy, poor spouses, poor planners. The idea is that if you have to resort to instant coffee, it's because you are not managing the house properly in order to find the time to make your husband a good pot of coffee. Well, doing the same study in the 1970s, what they found is that the shopping list for the one that had the instant coffee, that shopping list and that individual was described as being more modern, more thrifty, a good spouse, right? So it was cost effective. They were able to save money. They were still making coffee at home, even though they were busy. In the 70s, we see more women entering the workforce than we saw back in the 50s. And so the perceptions we can see have changed of women using that instant coffee. So we can use this to measure what are the perceptions of our product and the people who use our product. We can also use it to get to more sensitive issues in terms of things that people aren't willing to talk about for themselves, whether that is use of more illicit drugs, right? You're not going to tell about how much heroin you've used or whether you've tried it. But if you're asked about, well, the typical person, as a typical person tried illegal drugs, tell us about the type of person who uses illegal drugs, what was their experience? And so it's a way for people to convey either their stereotypes and their perceptions or to tell you about their personal experiences without it being attached to them themselves. So let's just turn off this. So that's turned off me. Let's turn off this. And let's go back to our original list. So in this video, we have looked at a number of different projective tests, from word association to sentence and story completion, cartoon tests, photo sorts, consumer drawing, storytelling, and that third person. These can be used in focus groups. We could have them look at photos and draw or rearrange photos. We could have them draw and then explain to the group. If we're trying to get at information that people are less willing to share with others, that's harder to turn into words and convey, then we would be using this more in an interview setting. If you are trying to use, say, like the storytelling, or where you're having them provide more detail, then you want to have that in more of an interview setting where there is the time for one person to talk for longer. In a focus group, remember that if you have 8 to 12 participants, you aren't necessarily hearing from everybody. And so if you're using projective tests in more of a focus group setting, it is going to have to be one of the more shorter, quicker methods like word association.